I don't know how much of an introduction I really need for this special guest today because she's one of the most famous and successful women in oil and gas. But here we go. Let me give you a little background. Today's guest is Stephanie Cox. She spent almost 3 decades at Schlumberger working around the world and leading and managing several of their biggest business units. Prior to taking over as Wood's America's CEO position, Stephanie was named President for North America Land Drilling Business at Schlumberger, which, let me tell you, is a really big deal and a big role. Stephanie Cox was named CEO of Wood America's business in October of 2019, so a little over a year ago. So congratulations on 1 year of being CEO, which is a huge milestone, especially for us, as there's only 7% of CEOs in the US energy space that are filled by women. So thank you so much for leading and paving the way for us younger women. Also, she's a wife and a mom of 2, which is even more impressive knowing how hard she works.
Well, Stephanie, without further ado, we've got to get the listeners what they want. So why don't we start with a little bit about yourself and what was life like growing up as Stephanie?
All right. Well, thank you both. I appreciate it. Big, high expectations with that introduction. So thank you. So growing up, I grew up in Michigan. And I didn't come to Texas until I graduated from Michigan State. And growing up, I came from a pretty normal family, 1 brother, mom and dad. Money was tight, so I always had different jobs. I started working as soon as I could, probably 15 years old, and I worked in high school and worked in order to have money. So I, wanted to have nice things and be able to do things with my friends. So in order to do that, you had to get a job. And so I had that. I worked a lot of jobs to help pay for going to Michigan State. And when I was there, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I was going to do. And kind of that instilled in me, hard work does pay off. And that came from my family for the most part.
Mm.
So I know that you mentioned that early on, like you said, at 15 years old, you were already working. You were working on weekends and the summers and even through college. And honestly, like almost any opportunity that you could to work and make some money, you took advantage of it. I remember when we first spoke to you, you mentioned that, that meant missing out on parties and get-togethers. And how was that? And what differentiated you with the fact that your friends weren't maybe necessarily doing that at that age? And did you feel like you were somewhat of an outsider compared to your peers?
I didn't feel like I was an outsider. I know I missed out on certain things because when you're in high school, the only time you can work would be after school or on weekends. So once my jobs would finish, then I would catch up with everyone, at the parties or whatever we were doing. And so you missed out on some, but I never felt like, my friends just knew, they respected me for that. So that wasn't a problem per se, but you would wish that you could not have to work so much. There are always those feelings like, God, I wish I could go do that or not have to do as much. And that probably was more in college, actually. Because in college you wanted to do more things, but you have to pay the bills to go to school. So you didn't have that. So at the time, but I would say, I'm never going to be like this if I have kids. And, my kids aren't going to have it as hard as I had it. But I can tell you now, I make my kids work. So I've eaten those words. And I think it definitely was a good thing that I went through, even though it was really tough.
Well, I know that you just learn a lot when you have to pay the bills and when you have to take care of the bill at the end of the day, right? Yeah. So, and I'm sure your parents respected that, and the college as well. You respected college a lot more while you were the one paying for that class. If you fail, it's your money, right?
It was.
Yeah, it hurts a little bit more. We also know that when you studied supply chain management at Michigan State. And one of your first internships was actually at a plastic molding facility, where you learned very well on what kind of leader you really wanted to be. Can you talk about this experience and how it impacted you till this day?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're going to school, it's important to have jobs or internships so that when you're interviewing, you have some sort of experience even beyond just the degree. And so one of the summer jobs, I was trying to think, okay, what am I going to do this summer? I want to have something that's relevant to what I was studying. And so I was studying supply chain. And at the time it was called materials logistics management. So I thought, well, if I want to be a manager someday, I need to know what it's like to work in a factory or something similar to that. So growing up in Michigan, we lived on the outskirts of Detroit. And so there was a lot of companies that supplied the automotive industry. So I got a job at a plastics injection molding facility and worked on a machine making car parts. And it was a really, I want to say tough meaning it was hot. You had to manufacture so many parts per hour, per day. And, I was a college kid working there, one of the only ones, and everyone else, these were jobs that they've had for 10, 15, 20 years. So that was their livelihood. So working in that environment, I learned a lot, about supply chain, how do you make a car part and why it's important to make it right the first time, because it will go then to an assembly line to go into a car. But also, what it was like to be an employee, a direct labor employee. And it was kind of very eye-opening to see how people behaved. And one of many things I just never will forget, and I always remember today, we each had these big, massive, injection molding machines. They're loud, it's hot, and the management team, they would come from the front office and then walk through the manufacturing area. And you can picture traditional, yellow lines or tape that don't go outside those boundaries, and they'd all be dressed up with their coffee mugs and walking down, and they just would kind of look you over and not talk with anyone. And it was just really, you could just feel, my other coworkers, they would tense up whenever the management would come through. And it wasn't a big place. And it would just take 2 seconds for someone just to come over and say, hello, how are you doing? What are you working on? And that really had an impression on me. And it was just so annoying, not for me personally, but to see how, my coworkers, how they felt. And they just didn't feel valued. And they just felt like they were just, one of many people. So I said, I will never be like that. I will never, ever be like that. And so there have been many times in my career where you're doing a field visit or a manufacturing visit. And I always remember that time. And just because I like spending time with people and I really like to understand how things work, I love manufacturing. I always make a point to spend time and talk with employees and genuine, hello, how are you? What's your name? And it just is something so natural, but that was a big impression on me. And I'll never forget that.
Wow, that summer really did change your leadership skills, because everyone that I've talked to that has had you as a manager or has worked for you have always brought that one thing up, is you're so personal and you say hi and you ask about their families, which is, like you said, it's so easy to do and it doesn't take much, but it empowers the people who work for you. So I think that's really awesome. And I hope, one day also I'll keep that in mind for one day. Let's talk
I just say thanks for saying that, but it is not hard to do if you really want to do it. And whether it was that summer job or we've all witnessed various leaders in our careers, you just see what an impact or impression they can have on people, and it can be very small and very quick, and it can make or break
yeah, like they said hi to me at the coffee machine,
yeah.
Yeah.
Or you just take the time to point somebody out and just show that, hey, I do see you. And like their whole attitude and everything changes. So Yes, no, that was just, thank you for sharing that. And like Maciel said, it's just amazing to hear that that is something that, you do practice, and it's evident. People know it.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about your dream job during college. You had mentioned that you were determined to get hired at Compaq Computers after graduation. You kept coming to Houston to not only visit your now husband, but it was your chance to go and bother everybody over at Compaq and try to show up to try to get an interview. And also back then, for all of you who don't know, but Compaq Computer was the it place to be. It was like working at Amazon, Google, Apple. It was, everybody wanted to work there. So I understand why this was your dream, role after graduating college. However, you got an offer letter and you turned it down and you decided to stick with Schlumberger, which was also one of the companies that had given you an offer right after graduation. What made you do that decision? And do you remember how you got to that conclusion? Was it an easy choice, or did you battle a little bit with it?
Yeah, this was a tough time, a good life lesson that has kept me going. When I was, before graduating, you're looking for a job, and I had admired Compaq Computer for a long time, and it was the company, and it was always being published for being very forward looking, and I wanted to work for that company more than anything. And I was pretty assertive, aggressive in my job search, because you had to hustle. Just like right now, it'd be really tough to find jobs. So you have to hustle and you have to make things happen. I had no connections with anybody. So, back then you didn't have the internet, you didn't have email to really, get things moving. So you're writing letters, you're making phone calls, etc. And every time I would read about Compaq, I'm like, gosh, I want to work for this company, because it was pretty special. So I would buy my own plane tickets to get to Houston with saving, my money, get on a plane, and I would let them know I'm going to be in town, if they were available for an interview, thinking that I would get an interview because I didn't have to pay for it. And I did that with a few companies, and I got the interviews. And at the same time, I also had a great opportunity with Amoco. And I interviewed with Amoco. I was trying to get a job in Houston because my now husband was graduating a bit before me and getting a job in Houston. So I did get a job offer from Amoco and was excited about it, but it was in Chicago. And it was one of 10 people that they were going to be hiring that year. So it was super exciting and super honored to be able to do that. I thought, darn it, I interviewed in Houston. I really want to go to Houston and work for Amoco, but it wasn't happening. Still working on Compaq, in the back of my mind, hoping that would come. And then I had a great opportunity to interview with Schlumberger. And interviewed at Schlumberger. The job was phenomenal. It was, right out of college, a real job, being a buyer with Schlumberger. And so I decided to take that job, accept it. And I was very excited about it, really enthusiastic. And so when I took that job, I then turned down the job with Amoco. And Amoco was really upset with me because they said, you made a commitment. You made a commitment to us that, you were going to come join us, and the importance of commitment. And so they wrote me a letter, as well as one to my school, outlining that. So it was a really hard letter to receive. It felt so bad receiving it. But the words were right. When you make a commitment, you need to follow through on your commitments. Do what you say you're going to do. So I felt bad about it. And then, trying to focus on, my next adventure with Schlumberger, and, dust myself off from that little sting. And then I did get the job offer from Compaq shortly thereafter. And I nearly died when it came. The letter at Compaq had all these cool colors I remember on their logos, and I got the letter from Compaq for the job offer. and I nearly died. I thought, oh my God, I can't now not.
I learned my lesson.
I learned my lesson. I can't turn down this other job. So I did turn down the job from Compaq because I hadn't said yes. So I followed through with Schlumberger, turned down Compaq, and it all sorted out, no
It
regrets
all worked out.
by any
Yeah.
means. But that was a tough lesson. And I still, doing what you say you're going to do, I still hold that in a really high regard. And that was an early lesson to learn on that.
What's really interesting about this is that at the time, you actually didn't really know much about Schlumberger. I remember you told us that you asked the previous manager, what's Schlumberger? And they're like, oh, they've got a really good stock price, buy their stock.
Yes.
So for you to actually accept the Schlumberger offer and then turn down two companies that you actually knew about and were very passionate about, says a lot. And what also says a lot is who you became within Schlumberger. So we do know that there was a time while you're working at Schlumberger that you were developing things that, hadn't been used before. You mentioned a credit card program, I believe, that you started when you were working in supply chain procurement type area.
Yeah.
When was there a point in your mind or was there a time when you thought that you're more of an entrepreneur within Schlumberger, or you took like a different path than many people who maybe just checked the box? You were doing more at that time.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's from just the jobs, growing up, and then when, you have kind of the grown-up job, and, I always liked finding better ways to do things. You would see something and think, okay, what's an easier way or a more efficient way to do this? How can I make this better? Not only for me, but the people that I work with. So I was very eager to try different things. And thankfully, my managers were okay with me trying different things. And sometimes I didn't really ask for permission. I didn't totally go out of my lane, but I didn't always ask. I just thought, well, this could work. Let me talk with some people and get this going. So whether it was, putting the procurement card program in that no one ever heard of and they were all nervous about, or just really doing things that you don't think are very innovative, but other people might not have the guts to try to do something different. So in a way, not having any fear, but also being kind of practical and spending time with people, listening to them, understanding how things work and how could we make it better. So I think those things, you start to get noticed. You're not doing them to be noticed, but then you start to get noticed because whenever you save the company money, that gets noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, whatever you can do to improve the bottom line of a company, that's, kind of why we're here in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And how you do it is really important. So over time, those types of things, it's having initiative without really thinking about it, that gets noticed. And then people, want to give you more opportunities because they'd like to see more of that.
Mm.
You also mentioned you were offered the manufacturing job to lead the wireline downhole tool manufacturing place. And I think you were about 29 years old when that happened. Why do you think you were selected for this role? And also, how did you manage to exceed expectations when you had to come in and try to convince people who had been working there 20 plus years that here comes this younger, manager, and she's going to come change the way we do things? Because you had mentioned that at the time, if there was a downturn or if they had to lay off people, the seniority employees were always the ones staying behind. So here you are younger, having to manage 20 plus your old employees.
Yeah. So I was probably a lot younger in seniority age at the time I was, presented that job, and I was really intimidated at first. And at the time I was 3 months pregnant or 4 months pregnant, hadn't told anyone. So here I am going into this job thinking, whoa, this is big. How am I going to do it? And with so many people on my team, a lot more senior than I am. And business was kind of booming at the time. And so we needed to increase production. And I thought, how am I going to do this? And so I really spent time understanding, well, how did things work? So how are we going to double production? And it goes back to, how do you improve things? And I could see where we could do it, but it required people to work differently. So I really would spend time understanding as much as I could, and then just said, okay, we're going to build 100 tools this year. And they said, there's no way, no, no, no. And, you know, when you hear that, sometimes it's like a cliche, but it gets you even more motivated. First, I needed to do it for my job, but I also thought there was a way. And when people don't want to change, they want to do the same old, then you got to find a way. How will they see that this is possible? And so we just would spend time, and I usually find the people who are the hardest to change, and you work on them the most. And really kind of, you have to earn their respect and earn their credibility. So I would spend time and ask them to teach me how to build tools, so I would learn how, and we developed a relationship. And then I just tried different things of saying, well, instead of you building this pump out module every day for the past few years, maybe Mike can build it, and maybe he can do it faster than you. And then they would get, competitive. And once they saw they were actually achieving the goal, they really were motivated by it. And that's when you kind of get this kind of copycat effect. And it doesn't become, it's not Stephanie's goal, it's, the team's goal. And that is extremely rewarding.
Yeah, when it becomes the team's goal, I think that's definitely a turning point. And that's when they all come together, and it's not like they feel like they're doing something just for their manager, but they're doing it for everybody.
Yeah.
So that's a really good perspective. What's really interesting too is that you end up actually getting an HR role that at the time you were not excited about. But a lot of people who work in Schlumberger, at some point, they always get offered this HR role, which even when I was there, I always found that very interesting, because you have people who have different backgrounds in other areas, but they seem to always want to teach you on HR. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned in that process, working in HR? Because ultimately it did actually expand your career, and how that actually benefits you in the long run.
Sure. Yeah. At the time, I didn't understand. I was asked to go into an HR role. I thought, well, this isn't, what I studied. Kind of had a little attitude about it, thinking, what am I doing? And I respected the HR manager so much that I just kept all those thoughts to myself. And I went into the role and thinking, okay, how am I going to do a good job? I'm used to having objectives. I knew how many tools I need to manufacture each month in the previous job. So how do I know I'm going to be doing a good job in HR? Because it's not as tangible. It's not just check the box type thing. So I learned a lot, and especially from the HR manager there. And there's a lot of things that you can do to make an impact, but you can't necessarily share, because there's so many confidential things. You're helping people, you're listening to people, you're helping them with their careers, you're helping with performance management, both positive as well as constructive. And it took a little bit, but then you would realize when when someone would leave my office, and I'm like, God, I did a good job. You'd have to give yourself a pat on the back, because you could feel the appreciation, and that's not something that you can just go out in the hallway and say, good job, Stephanie. So those are different things, and you learn about how the company works, and you learn about how you can be effective in a different way. And I think communication was a really big part of HR, how you communicate with employees internally, externally, and that the voice and what your message says, how much it means. So it was an important role, and probably one of the roles that, had I not done it, I wouldn't be, talking with you, because it really gives you an opportunity. Schlumberger did, that was an important function in the company, to lead to other things and help you be even better as a leader.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, like you said, you need to be challenged in order to grow and step out of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Because, like you mentioned, HR always just has been this thing where I'm like, I would never want to be in HR. You know, it's like this one role that I don't think many of us like. But, like you said, you know, you wouldn't be here today if you wouldn't have taken the risk and taken that chance to just, you know what, trying it. And I think the funny thing about that is when you first had told us about it, you said, you know, like, I didn't go to school to do this thing. But I think you became president for HR or VP. You were really high up on the HR. So it seems like, you know, the things that you don't want, sometimes you end up being really good at it.
It's true. I had a lot of HR jobs. I was in HR in Schlumberger for many years, leading that, and it was a phenomenal job because it helped in so many ways on things that we worked on in the company, and I was able to contribute, I think, significantly with my peers and others. But it is a lesson too. You know, you go to school for one thing, it doesn't mean that's going to be exactly what you do, and you have to be
Mm-hmm.
very open to it. Because if I had not said yes and taken a risk and tried something different, um, I would have missed out on
Mm-hmm.
so many different things. And that's why I think it's just important that you don't just set your sight, you know,
Mm-hmm.
on one thing only.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. So let's talk about your husband. He has played a crucial role in your
Yeah.
career, and I think anyone who is successful needs a understanding partner that is your number one cheerleader to,
Hmm.
you know, help you grow in your career and in life. You mentioned that he had to quit a few jobs in the early stages of his career, and I mean, he went to school, he got a degree, he also changed degrees, but at the end
Yeah.
of the day, he was always supportive and dropped whatever, you know, he had to complement your career, especially when you guys had to move abroad. When you guys had your children, he decided to stay home and, you know, be quote unquote stay at home dad, which is very non-traditional. It's not every day that you meet someone that does that, but I think it's awesome. And we wanted to touch base on how was that dynamic between both of you, and when was that decided? And then last question is, how has he felt throughout the last years looking back that he, you know, did what most women do, which is give up, you know, their careers for their partner to succeed?
Yeah. So we've been married a long time, 28 years. And um, we talked a lot, you know, during the time of the career transitions. And, you know, even for him, he decided, you know, after he went to school, got a job, then he went back to school, you know, and quit a job. So we've always been really open about, you know, conversations, careers. And I think that's especially important that you have those conversations before the question comes up
Mm-hmm.
when a job comes up, so that you're prepared and it's not a surprise, so that you eliminate that type of stress. So we had always talked about, you know, what would we do if we were offered, you know, I say we, you know, what if we were offered an opportunity to move? Would we actually pack up and move, or, you know, so I could take another job? So that conversation was easy to have when it presented itself. So the first move was to Austin, Texas, and he was a teacher for 1 year because he had went back to school to be a teacher, and not even a year, and quit his job. And we packed everything up and did our first move to Austin, Texas. And and so that was an exciting, you know, new transition. He got a job. He still says it's his dream job, the best job he ever had. Um, but we had the conversation again. Well, what if we were ever asked to go overseas? You know, what would we do? And we'd say, you know, then you kind of fantasize what that would be like, and say, well, you've got to try it. You know, what's the worst thing that could happen? So we would say we would just do it. And that time Survivor Island was really popular.
Yeah.
So we said, we just got to make sure no one gets voted off the island,
Yeah.
right? And so that opportunity, I was presented an opportunity to go to Paris with Schlumberger, and we were just shocked, really shocked at the opportunity, and said, well, let's try it. There's nothing, we'll never know unless we try it. So he quit his job. We packed up, moved overseas, and he couldn't work overseas. And we had a 3-year-old son. And I was able to do an international job, a really intense job, one that consumed a lot of time, learning curve, getting up to speed. And we were there for a few years, and then had a baby girl over there as well. And when we came back, I said, well, what are you going to do? You're going to go back to teaching? Thinking that he would want to. And he said, no, I think one of us should stay home. And I says, I'll do that for the first period, until our daughter Madeline was able to not be at home. And I thought, wow. I said, are you sure? Are you sure? Thinking, that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And he says, no, I want to do that. And I said, okay. And so that was a surprise for me. And so that just has continued on. And he had been the primary caregiver. Our kids are 17 and 22 now. But that decision, I think, was a big one for our family and our family dynamics. And it really helped enable me to, do the jobs I've been doing. I wouldn't, be here also if it wasn't for Jason and the support that he's given. So it hasn't been probably easy, but it has been really meaningful. And I just can't, thank him enough for that as well. And it is still non-traditional. I think it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, but still a little non-traditional.
The first time we talked about this, we were very surprised, and we just thought that it was absolutely amazing and to have such a supportive husband. But you also mentioned that you get asked a lot. Sorry, my dog. You also mentioned that you get asked a lot if one spouse has to stay home in order to the other one to succeed in their career. Because we either see that with the wife staying home or the dad staying home. Do you think that that is something that has to happen?
I want to say I don't, but I only have my perspective, honestly. So, if that was really important for Jason to want to get back into working outside the house, then we would find a way to do that, because it's important, I think, for both, sides of the couple, that they feel good about the decision. And, this comes back to the dual career topic. There are so many women graduating and, from universities, and the number of dual career couples, I think, is going to continue to increase. So finding a way to do that, to make sure that you can be able to do it, is important. And I mean, my advice when we were talking was, if you have the means to get some type of help, in any shape or form, not to be so proud to say, I don't need any help, but find a way to get some help in any way, shape, or form, so that you both can, take care of your family, but also have your career aspirations as well. But it has to work for the family. Everyone has their own combinations, I think.
Yeah, no,
at the end of the day,
excellent advice.
At the end of the day, it's all about communication, just like you said. And, last time we talked to, and as we said in the beginning, you're a huge inspiration to many people in the oil field. And you're still a very powerful leader in this industry. How did you manage to be successful as a woman in a male-dominated industry? And we have found that many women who have not had a female manager before had an unconscious bias that actually held them back. Maybe they didn't see anybody within the company succeed, like-minded, like either being a woman or maybe of different diversity. What do you think, what advice would you give them to, not have that unconscious bias?
Yeah, my first manager in the company was a female, actually, my first job. I didn't think anything of it, though. I didn't think male versus female. And, obviously there were more men in the company, but I guess it didn't have so much of an impact that it bothered me in any way. And, I would say growing up in the company, I think it came back to, the conversation earlier, when you're finding ways to improve the company's results, you're doing your little projects, you're getting recognition because you're helping and you have initiative and you're kind of just going about doing your job, you get recognized. So it's really the results, I think, that have mattered. That's how you move up in the company, what you contribute and what results you have. But obviously, as I was growing up, and you see that it is more male dominated and there are more leaders who are male, it shouldn't deter you, and so I think the unconscious bias topic is a lot more popular now because we talk about it more now. And, we all have biases, and it's very hard to say that anyone doesn't. And anyone that has been through unconscious bias training, you see that, that's just a normal existence. So I think the more that we are aware of it and the more that we continue promoting the talent, both men and women, that will get easier. I really do believe in that. But there has been a wonderful amount of progress in this area, and I have no doubt it's going to continue.
One thing that I've noticed with almost all the women that we have asked who are successful, how did you manage being the only woman in a male-dominated industry? Or when people, ask Jamie and us how it is to only be working with guys, I feel like the people who are successful is similar to what you said. Like, we've never noticed it. We aren't, it's all about mindset. We aren't coming in saying, I'm the only girl in the room. What are they going to think about me? Right. It's
exactly
like you said, it's never been a problem for us. So I really do think it's all about just what's in your own mind and what you're building up around it.
Yeah. I never wanted to draw attention to it.
Exactly.
I never wanted the attention on it because that's the worst.
Yeah, you just want to be like the same.
Absolute worst. Yeah.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
And you could tell there are different things you'd get invited to, or you'd get extra attention once you started to realize, and you just didn't like it. And I think for those that do like it, don't like it.
Yeah.
It's just not cool. Just be who you are and get recognized for your, performance.
I love that. Yeah, I totally agree. So you've obviously had a very successful career. I mean, you are now CEO, which is super exciting. And I remember, like, even growing up within Schlumberger, there was always Stephanie Cox that kept showing up. And like we said in the beginning, you really did pave the road to a lot of us because, like Jamie said, sometimes you want to look up to see someone that looks like you or has, like, okay, there's another woman that made it. So, maybe we all got a chance, So I think it's amazing. But behind all of that, there is a lot of hard work that you've put in over the last 28 plus years that no one necessarily sees all the time, because a lot of times we see people in positions and we just assume she got lucky, she's a girl, of course, she probably made all the promotions. Behind all the hard work, which shows even from a younger age you've always been working, you have that work ethic. There is a lot of stress, a lot of expectations to be CEO. You have to travel, meet clients, all the rest of the stuff. Plus, you're trying to manage your life, have a family, a husband, and kids. Do you believe in work-life balance? And what is the best advice that you have for anyone that has that much to juggle to be successful?
Yeah. I think it's a word that everyone wants, but I would really love to know what balance looks like, because it's not an even 50-50 for me. It probably never has been. And that doesn't mean I think it's a bad thing. I think it just means something different for different people. And, the people who I have worked with on various teams, I mean, they know I do work really hard. I get a lot of satisfaction when you get good results with a team. And like you said, from growing up, I've always been working. I would say my work life gets a little bit more proportion than my personal life, which is not a good thing. You think, well, you should be having more balance, but it's what's worked for our family, frankly. And, the time that I spend with my family is extremely valuable. It's precious, and it's what you do with that time.
Mm-hmm.
So family vacations are the splurge that we have in the family of doing things together and going to, pretty cool places, and how you create memories. That's something really important for me. Spending time, I try to stay healthy and exercise so many times per week. So that's another niche, of time. But I personally don't believe you get to certain jobs without putting in a lot of hard work. And part of getting energy and enjoying what you do is from kind of the success and the results that you're able to contribute. And it goes back to, these early days when you find a way that you can make something better for the company or better for the people that you work with. That is exciting and that feels good. Where it becomes more of a burden is when you can't get the results that you want on them. So where you choose to invest your time is something extremely personal, and it's very easy to judge, and I think everyone wants that magic recipe of what's good, what's good work-life balance. But if you have, I think, realistic expectations of yourself, and you have good family dynamics where you're able to really talk about it, and Jason, he'll call me out on it. It's like a little too much. You need to, cut it back.
Yeah.
I was actually just going to ask that and
He
say,
does.
in the last 29 years or 30 years, was there ever a time where you became somewhat of a workaholic where you don't even realize just how much you're working, where you need someone like your husband to say, hey, like the kids are bringing up the fact that you weren't home for X, or did that ever happen?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It does happen, and you need that. You need that kind of reality check, dial it back a bit, is it worth it, type thing. Because
Well, you need that partner that you can speak to and that can tell you this without y'all getting into a huge argument where it's an ultimatum. And I think that is where a lot of people mess up, is where it becomes an ultimatum, where it's the job or the wife or the husband. And that's when it becomes, uncomfortable.
It's true. So the balance, the topic it just means so many different things to different people. So I can't say what's right for everyone. I know I probably work too much, I will say, and I would love to dial it back a bit.
But I also think it's what makes you happy. It's like what makes you shine every day, that your team is successful and that your work is being noticed.